I want to talk a little bit about A Monster Calls, a movie I saw a few days ago that just really affected me and had a big impact on me. I want to analyse some of the things about it, I want to explore some of the topics, maybe explain some of my thoughts about the movie itself. Now, the movie is all about the main character, Connor. And the movie's seen through his point of view, and it's about his mother who has a terminal illness, his absentee father, his grandmother, and a large monster. One of the first things I want to talk about is family within this movie. The family unit is broken, and you can see that very early on. There is three main adults within his life. Like I said, there's his mother who is terminally ill and can't do the things that she wants to do for him. There is the father who is living in the States and probably doesn't get to see him very much, isn't a big influence on his life. And there is his grandmother who... Connor and his grandmother have a very abrasive relationship. You see this in some of the scenes that they're in together. They just don't get on. They're not in the same wavelength and they seem kind of forced together, which they are being. And the family unit takes a big part of the movie within the stories that the monsters tell as well. In the first story with the king, the queen, the grandson, the witch queen, Connor sees his grandmother as being the queen, the witch, the person that's trying to take over his kingdom, his life, who's trying to enforce himself onto it. And in the initial story, he sees himself as the prince, the one that's trying to do the right thing, who has to rise up against the queen. It's not until he hears the rest of the story that he realises that the prince was wrong to suspect the queen of wrongdoing and that the queen was actually a good person and may have become evil, but that's undecided at that moment, at that time in her life. She was a good person. It's pointing out that the grandmother, could be bad, but ultimately, is probably doing things for a right reason. In the second story, Connor sees both his grandmother as the apothecary and the parson. He sees her as the apothecary at the start, someone who is sidelined, marginalised, pushed out of a community, someone that's wrong, whose wares are outdated. And then that changes when he hears the second half of the story and he sees the grandmother as the person who's lost her belief in her daughter's ability to fight this and the belief that her daughter's going to be okay, Connor's mum. And that's when he lashes out at that point. He kind of, in all these stories, there's a duality to it where one thing and then you get further information and it proceeds to a secondary tale that changes the facts of the first one. But in these stories, there is always an absent parent. In the first story, the queen dies of a broken heart and she's not really much of the story. It's one parent, the king. In the second story, it's the parson. He mentions a wife, but kind of in the sidelines, in the background, and you don't really hear much about it. It's all about the parson. Again, an absentee parent. These stories kind of mirror Connor's life and teach him a life lesson along the way that, usually two parents would teach their kids, but in this point it's hard for them to do that when one's absentee and the other one's critically ill. Isolation. As the story itself says, he's too old to be considered a kid but far too young to be considered a man. He's 12 years old. He's starting to develop all of these complicated feelings and emotions and people just ignore him. It's down to people's fault. It's not his fault. People don't know how to communicate with him. They don't know what to say to someone whose parent is looking like they're going to die. And that's why he's kind of marginalised by everybody at school. They don't know how to interact with him, so they choose not to see him, which leads to the third story about an invisible man. Other than his mum, dad and grandma, the only adult that sort of speaks to him in the movie is a teacher and a principal. And the teacher says something to him about needing to talk, he's there for him, and that forces everybody in the class to look at Connor, and that's when you really see a sense of unease in him. He doesn't want to be the focus of the wrong attention, which is what this teacher's bringing on him. And again, the principal who kind of gives him a little bit of a scolding, but ultimately tells him that she's not going to punish him because what's the point? Nobody seems to take anything action at him or direct things to him the way it normally should be done. They kind of gingerly move around about him. Other than those people, you don't really see any other adults in the movie. They're kind of out of focus, they walk by him, nobody acknowledges him, and that's how he feels. He feels marginalised and he feels ignored by almost everybody around about him. Nobody's given him the information that he's longing for, he requires, he needs. The only person he really interacts with at school is the bully, who he doesn't really talk to, he doesn't fight, he doesn't defend himself, he just takes a beating and it moves on from there. This is the one person that doesn't treat him gingerly. Even at home, he gets to spend small pockets of time with his mother, but mainly he's looking after himself. He's sorting his cooking, he's doing his own cleaning, he's looking after the household. Not something that a 12-year-old boy should be doing, but he feels he has to. And even in his free time, he spends most of it in his room drawing, alone, solemn, listening to music, or in a fantasy world with his tree monster. It is isolation either brought on by other people or within himself, drawn back from society. You know, he actively does try to pull away from everybody. In class, he's drawing, he's not listening to the lessons, but nobody's challenging him. At one point, he actually puts on headphones and he's listening to music in the middle of class when they're about to have a test. But again, nobody challenges him, nobody notices him. He's just doing whatever he wants, and he seems to be getting away with it. Negativity and guilt. The crux of the movie is Connor's negativity and guilt towards letting his mother go. In fact, he says to the monster at the end, he just wants it to be over. He could have held on to her for longer, but he just let her go. He just wants it to be done with. He wants it over. He wants the pain to stop. And it's because of his guilt and his negativity that he lashes out. He tears up his grandmother's home in the hope of getting punished, getting dealt with, having some sort of reaction. But the reaction he gets just makes him feel more guilty and more solemn. He's remorseful for the actions that he's taken because of the pain that he's caused his grandmother. It's a parallel with the first story that the prince doesn't want the queen, so he excises her from the community. He turns the townspeople against her. The townspeople are negative and rise up against the queen, and they get the prince that they deserve in the story because of their negativity towards the queen, because of false information and false acts. And then in the second story, the apothecary is negative, but he's negative for the right reasons, because he is a negative person but a right-thinking person, and it's a strange dichotomy, which is pretty much the human condition. The guilt and negativity is Connor's truth within the movie, and because of that guilt, he looks for punishment wherever he can. When he breaks up his grandmother's house, he looks to be punished, but he gets told, what's the point? Nobody seems to care. At school, when he beats up the bully, again, what's the point? Nobody seems to care. And the only reason he beats up the bully is because that was his form of punishment. He was taking the beatings, he didn't fight back, he didn't defend himself, when quite clearly he could have, because later on he does, and he does to a certain extent, that he puts the bully in hospital. So he was taking that as a form of punishment that he felt he deserved. Now, I looked at the monster as Connor's inner self, his emotions and his inner conflict. When he first challenges the monster, he's angry and he's defiant and he shouts back at it and he's challenging and he's fighting with his inner self. And then that's kind of juxtaposed with the next scene where he meets his grandmother at the house and she tells him something that he doesn't want to hear, and he's angry and he's defied and he fights back, much like he did with the monster. And he's angry with the stories that the monster tells him because they don't have a good and bad segment. They're complicated. You know, good people do bad things happen to innocent people, you know, bad people are saved. It's complicated stories. They're not just right and wrong, which is what Connor's looking for. He's looking for a good thing and a bad thing. But the monster's there to help him learn from his mistakes and make him cause some mistakes, as your inner choices do. And he's supposed to learn from that and move on and sort of help build the person that he's going to become. But the monster is almost viewed like a godlike creature as well. He begs for his mother's life. He begs for his mother to be saved, for the monster to help deal with something with his grandmother. It's almost like looking at a godlike figure or asking his inner self for strength to help deal with these situations. At the end, the monster teaches him that no one person is all good and all bad. And sometimes bad things happen to good people. Sometimes people can be perceived as bad, but they're doing things for the right reasons. And overall, that humans are just complicated beasts. Suffering. Connor watches his mother wither away, her struggle with and battle for life as it tears her down. Her physical struggle, and it weighs parallel to Connor's with his psychological struggle, trying to come to terms with the pain and grief that he is suffering. This is shown in his truth, his reoccurring nightmare, as the ground literally falls away from underneath his feet. He struggles to hold on to his mother as she slips through his fingers and he stands at the end of a precipice, a void, unsure of the future, unsure of what's about to happen. And it all leads to the coming to terms with loss and grief and the complex emotions that a person has at this terrible time in their life. It's a harsh lesson and sharp growth to a young person that probably isn't ready to deal with that. And then we get to the end of the story and Connor gets his new room at his grand's house where they've made up, and he's learnt to deal with some issues, and he finds his mother's book. And within the book, it shows images of the monster, the prince, the apothecary. And that kind of leads you with two conclusions, in my opinion. One, this was her mother's stories, this was something her mother created, and she taught these stories or told these stories to Connor all through his life, and he's kind of maybe forgot about them, but they've came to the forefront with what's happening to his mother. Or it could be that it's something magical, it's something that has helped him through this time, it's something that maybe helped her mother through an occasion in her life, something like this. Because there is scenes near the end of the movie where the mother looks as though she's looking at the tree monster and kind of happy to see him. Which is strange, because one part of me is saying it's all Connor's inner self, but another part of me just wants to believe in that sort of something that was tangible, that helped him through this situation, something else that helped him get through all these complicated emotions and feelings in extremely tough times. Anyway, that's my opinion on A Monster Calls, a movie that I loved, I thought was fantastic, I really enjoyed it, it really touched me, and I hope you liked it as much as I did. Now, this is one guy on the internet's opinion, could be wrong, could be right, who knows, it's up to you to make up your own opinion. I just hope you check the movie out. But let me know in the comment box below what you thought of A Monster Calls. Did I get it right? Have I missed some things? Is there other interpretations that you had? Please let me know, because I'd love to talk about this really rich movie. And I'll see you next time on Man vs. Film.